Hello everyone, welcome to my session at the Scottish Summit 2021 on mastering Dataverse for Teams to build Power Apps for Teams. Before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsors, ScriptRunner, Global, Proximo 3, Redspire, Agilicis, and Hitachi Solutions. A little bit about myself. My name is Hardit Bhatia. I work as an architect in the Power Platform practice at Hitachi Solutions. I'm a Microsoft Business Applications MVP and a Microsoft Certified Trainer. So what is Dataverse for Teams? We all spend a lot of time every single day in Teams, and most of us have used Power Apps and know that it's a very powerful platform. What Dataverse for Teams does is it brings the power of Teams and Power Apps together. I like to call it the light version of database, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I call it a light version only because there are certain differences between Dataverse for Teams and Dataverse. For example, the storage is limited to 2 gigabytes. Certain complex field types are not available in Dataverse for Teams, but it still brings the power of a relational database, which is a huge benefit. It has a simplified security model, which is better than SharePoint because it provides concepts like record owners. And if you don't have complex security needs like field level security or business units, you don't really need to use the full Dataverse. And then it brings you a new set of controls that we will talk about in detail in some of the later slides. And it recognizes different Teams features and settings, which makes it possible for you to perform actions from within your apps. Before we get too deep into Dataverse for Teams, I would like to talk about the 5 sample apps that we at Hitachi Solutions have created for Dataverse for Teams. The first one is Inspection. It allows you to create checklists that can be used by frontline workers to inspect areas and assets. Next is Issue Reporting. It enables team members to report common issues using issue templates. Next is Employee Ideas. It allows employees to create and organize ideas by campaigns. They can also then vote on ideas and then perform actions on the ideas that get the maximum votes. Next is Bulletins. It allows you to manage company communications in Teams. These can be videos as well that you can share with the entire organization. And the last one is Milestones. It allows you to track work against critical milestones by creating work items, and it also logs detailed activities for every change that happens in any work item within a project. The reason I wanted to mention these sample apps is because all the concepts that we will talk about today in the session, you will find them in these sample apps. You can go to the App Store within Teams and search for any of these sample apps and then edit these apps to either customize and enhance the functionality or just look at them to understand these concepts. With that said, one of the biggest questions or most common questions that I get is, I'm already using Dataverse. Why would I care about Dataverse for Teams? The advantage of Dataverse for Teams is that it brings this concept of Teams integration or the ability to integrate with Teams that you can use in apps that are built on full Dataverse as well. Another reason for me to like Dataverse for Teams and another reason for you to use Dataverse for Teams is it brings some good design patterns with it. We'll take a look at an app where you can see that an app out of the box comes with good design patterns that you can incorporate even in your non-Dataverse for Teams apps. And then lastly, Teams allows you to have a good place or a good platform for users to access your apps, whether they are created on Dataverse for Teams or full Dataverse. This helps prevent app sprawl because it allows you to do things like incorporating all related apps into one team. For example, all HR related apps could simply be added to the HR team in Teams. So we'll talk about a few general UI concepts when it comes to Dataverse for Teams apps. These concepts or these design patterns can be incorporated into apps that you create even outside of Dataverse for Teams, because once you add an app to Teams, it makes for a better user experience if your app looks part of Teams rather than a Power App that was created outside of Teams and then simply added to Teams. So simple concepts like fonts and font sizes can make a huge difference. The font that is used in Teams is Sego UI. Font sizes for most of the content in an app is set to 10.5. And then all the text within Teams is in sentence casing, which means the first alphabet of the first word is in uppercase. All the other alphabets in a given text are in lowercase. And that's something that took me a lot of time to adapt to, because I would typically capitalize the first alphabet of every single word. And then I will show you what I mean by layout in a couple of seconds. So let me switch to Teams. So if you go to Teams, you can add Power Apps to your left navigation bar. And the way you would do that is by clicking on these three dots. Then you can search for Power Apps. And then if you click on these three dots, you can say pin. I've already pinned it, so I get an option to unpin it. I would strongly suggest pin it so you can always access it from the left navigation bar. Then if you click on Power Apps, it will take you to this screen where it will show you all the existing apps that you have, and it will also show you the 5 sample apps that we discussed a few seconds ago. If you then create a new app, as you will see that the default design layout is much better than when you create an app outside of Dataverse for Teams. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to call it a test app. As you can see, the default layout is the desktop layout or the tablet layout. What I really like about this layout is it uses the real estate in a very good way. So there is a gallery on the left hand side. Then the right hand side is where you have a form. So if you click on any records within this gallery, you can see the details of that record on the right hand side and still see the entire list of records. And it also tells you which particular record you are currently viewing. The same form, which is an edit form, can be used to create new records as well. And then of course you can delete records or edit records as well. So all that functionality is incorporated into one screen, which uses the real estate very nicely. So moving on to the new set of controls that are available in Dataverse for Teams. They are called Fluent UI Controls. The cool thing about these controls is that they have Teams colors incorporated into them. So if you add one of these controls, you don't have to set properties like color or fill color. They have those Teams colors by default. Another cool thing is they adapt to Teams theme. If you go into your Power Apps in Dataverse for Teams, you may not see that right now. That functionality has been disabled because there are some enhancements that are going on, but you can expect that to come back in the future. My tenant, for some reason, is still on an old release. So I can still have, you can still see these controls adapt to Teams theme in my tenant, and I'll show you that. So because of the fact that all the colors are already set, it allows for quick designs. So you can start building your apps quickly, and your apps by default, without you even giving any consideration to UI, will actually look very beautiful. That does mean that there are some configurations that are not available when compared to the classic controls. For example, if you want to add a border to a label, that's not possible with Fluent UI Controls. And there are some differences between classic controls and Fluent UI Controls, and I'm going to show you some of those in the next couple of seconds. So if I go here and I click on this plus sign, you can access all the Fluent UI controls here. So let me add a couple of them and show you how beautiful they are. So this is a label. Again, you probably won't notice anything because you can't add a border to it. But let me add a text box. Looks very neat, very slick. And the one that stands out the most to me is the date picker control. So if I click here, you can see that the date picker control is very beautiful when compared to the classic date picker control. And now if I change the theme here, if I switch to default mode, and I think I might have lost the ability to have these controls adapt to the team's theme. I'm going to try that once more and see if it's still an option within this instance of my teams. If not, like I said, it's going to come back in the future. So while that loads, I want to show you how you can still add the classic controls to your apps if you really want to do that. So you can go to settings and you can go to advanced settings, and if you scroll down to the bottom, there is an experimental feature that says if you want to have classic legacy controls in your app, you can set this toggle to on. Now if I go back into my app, it does take a few seconds for it to refresh. So let me just go back outside of this app, and then if I go into this app again, I should see the option to add classic controls. So let's see if I see that now. And if this particular window has opened, let's go to one of my teams in which I added an old app. So it's right here. It has a few controls. Again, it's not a functional app. I just wanted to show you how controls adapt to the team's theme. And again, there is a text box. There is a simple date picker control, nothing fancy here. But now if I switch the theme to dark, you can actually see that the controls have now adapted to the team's theme, and I didn't even have to refresh the app. The controls adapted right on the fly. So if I go back here, let's see if I now have the option to add classic controls. It's still not there, but what you will see is you will see another option here that says classic controls, and if you expand that, you will get access to all the controls that you are used to using. If you notice, in Fluent UI, you don't have icons available. So I'm going to try once more to see if I can bring back those classic controls, or I'm just going to switch to one of my old apps and see if I have that option enabled there, because I really want to show you the fact that you can add classic controls and the fact that even the classic controls come preloaded with all the team's colors. So let's see if I'm able to open this app now, and we will see that the option to add classic controls does show up here. So if I expand this and I add, let's say, a button, you can see that it comes preloaded with team's colors. You can of course override that if you want to, but even if you don't adapt or focus or spend any time on UI, your controls will look beautiful by default. So I just wanted to show you this. And one more thing I would like to show you again, just because I've had problems with how the classic date picker control looks. So this is the Fluent UI date picker, and this is the classic date picker. If I click on this one, it's a beautiful control, allows for a lot of navigation options. If I click on the classic control, it at least looks better than what you are normally used to because of the team's colors, but it is not a good control. You cannot resize it. And you have, after selecting a date, you have to click the OK button, and you don't have navigation. You do have navigation options to switch months, but the option to do that here in this control is much easier. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the next topic. Actually, before I do that, one last thing which is very important is certain properties have been renamed. So if you have used classic control, you are used to accessing the date from a classic control using the control name and saying selected date. That option is not available. It has been renamed for the Fluent UI control. So if I get the name of this control and if I do type in a dot, I won't see the option or a property that says selected date. It has now been renamed to value. So if I now select a date here, you will see that it tells me what the selected date is. So property names have changed. So I strongly suggest you check this link where all the differences have been highlighted. Themes. As we saw a couple of seconds ago, there are 3 different themes that are available within Themes: default, dark, and high contrast. You can access the theme, or you can get access to which theme a user is in a couple of ways. If you are creating an app in Dataverse for Teams, you have what is known as the Teams integration control. If you have used embedded Canvas apps, which is Canvas apps embedded in a model-driven form, you might know that there is a model-driven form integration control that gives you access to the contextual record. Similarly, there is this Teams integration control that gives you access to some of the contextual properties. I'm going to show you a few of them. So if you simply type in Teams dot, it shows you a list of options that are available. We'll look into these options in detail in the next few slides. But one of the ones that I really like is you can get access to the theme of the user by simply typing in teams.theme.name. So in this case, it tells me that it's dark. If I switch my Teams theme to default, this label would say default. But what happens if you are creating an app outside of Dataverse for Teams that you want to add to Teams and you want the controls to adapt to the Teams theme? The cool thing is you can get the same information by using the param function, and you can simply use the param function, and I believe it's called theme, and that gives access to the Teams theme, and it would return the same values that you see here. So given the fact that you can access the Teams theme in a couple of different ways, it becomes pretty cool because you can now get access to you can use the Fluent UI color palette if you are using classic controls, or if you have an app that you build outside of Dataverse for Teams, you can still define properties or color properties that are based on the Teams color scheme by using the Fluent UI color palette and fetching the theme that a particular user is in, and then adapting to have your controls adapt to the Teams theme, even if they are in an app that was created outside of Dataverse for Teams. The Teams integration control is what we saw in the last slide. That gives you access to not just the Teams theme, but a lot of other properties. Like you can see if an app is in full screen mode or not. You can get the channel ID and the team ID. You can also get a meeting ID because now you can add Power Apps to a meeting as well. And then you can get access to information like if a user is accessing the app in a side panel in a meeting. And these become useful because you can have certain functionality that is available only when an app is added to a meeting, as an example. So if I go back here and if I do Teams dot, you can see I have access to these properties where it says, let's say I want to check if the app has been opened in full screen or not. In this case, it's obviously not, so it says false. And similarly, you have access to all these properties that can give you contextual information of how a user is accessing an app. The param function is important, especially for apps that you create outside of Dataverse for Teams, because you don't have the Teams integration control in apps that are outside of Dataverse for Teams. So if you want all the contextual information, you can use the param function to get access to the same information that the Teams integration control gives you access to. So I do have an app here where it's a simple data table that shows you the different parameters that are available to you, which you can access using the param function. For example, you can get the channel ID, you can get the group ID as well. You can check how or which device the user is using to access this app. Is the app in full screen or not? And what is the theme of Teams for a given user? And the parameter for that is theme with a lower t. I think in one of the previous slides, the example I showed was param with a capital T. But if you want to access theme, you would want to use the param function with a parameter called theme with lowercase t. I'm going to use the same app to explain the concept of making your apps responsive. If you are creating an app in Dataverse for Teams, they are responsive by design. But if there are apps that you have created outside of Dataverse for Teams that you want to add to Teams, you would want to make certain changes to your apps to make it responsive. So the few different things that you would want to do starts off with scaling. So if I now go back to my Teams theme, as you can see, this was a very simple app that I created outside of Dataverse for Teams. It is a data table that shows you the different params, but you can see that there is a lot of gray space on either side, which doesn't look cool. So the first thing that you would want to do is, if I go to this app, the first thing that you would want to do in an app, and let's see if I can open an app here. Let me refresh the screen and see if it lets me open an app again. But the first thing that I tried when I was trying to make an app responsive is to optimize the embedding experience. So I'm in the default environment, which is why I don't see those apps. So let me see if I can edit this app. So there is a property that is available. I believe it's a preview feature that lets you optimize the embedding experience. That particular feature is turned on for all the apps that you create from within Dataverse for Teams. So this one is not opening for some reason. So I'm going to go back to this app here. So if you go to settings and you go to advanced settings, in preview features, there is one feature, or it's actually an experimental feature that says optimize embedding appearance. What that does is it anchors the app to the left hand side. So if I move on to this particular app, you will see that the data table is anchored to the left hand side here, but there is a lot of white space on the right hand side. The problem that I have with this white space is it doesn't adapt to the Teams theme. So if I switch the theme to default and I refresh the app, the space is white in color. If I switch back to the dark mode and I refresh the app, the app has adapted to the Teams theme because that's how I specified the colors for the classic controls that I have in this app. But the space on the right hand side is still white, which again doesn't prevent your app from being functional, but it doesn't look that cool. So turning that feature on is definitely not good enough. The next thing you would want to do to make your app responsive is to turn scaling off. So if you go to settings and you go to screen size plus orientation, you would want to turn off scale to fit. If you do that, your app now changes to something like this, where the data table is still anchored to the left hand side, but now the entire app is filled with the same color, same background color as that of the screen. And now if I change my theme back to default and refresh the app, it should have a different background. And now your app looks like it's part of Teams. It's still not completely responsive because the data table, yes, it's anchored to the left-hand side, but it's very small. So with a couple of simple changes, you can actually make this data table responsive as well. And the way you would do that is you would set the width and height of this data table to parent.width and parent.height. So let's see what happens when you do that. It's the same app with just that one change. And now, as you can see, the data table covers the entire screen. It's completely responsive and it looks cleaner. And as you can see, it looks as if it has always been a part of Teams. Another thing that I would like to highlight is when you turn scale to fit off, there is a cool way that you can test responsiveness of your app. So if you click on the preview button, you will now see this option where it lets you choose between window size and canvas size. If you select canvas size, you will see this app in the same mode as you see within the studio when you're editing the app. But if you switch to window size, it fills in the entire available space. And if you resize your browser window, it adapts to the size of the window and you can test responsiveness without having to save and publish the app. Another way that I have used to test responsiveness, especially when this particular preview feature or this particular feature when you hit preview was not available, is I add a slider control. So if I come here, I can add a slider control. I then set the width of a container. So let's see this. Let's try this left container. As you can see here, its width is specified by using a formula and its height is simply parent.height. So you can set the height or width of this container to something like slider1.value. And then what happens is you can change the slider width, and let's say the maximum width is going to be 280. And now as you move the slider, you can check if your gallery in this case is adapting to the screen size or not. So I like this way of testing responsiveness because I don't even have to hit preview and then resize my browser window, but you do have that option. So you can use the one that works the best for you. Let's see what we have next. You also have new layout controls. So if I go back to the app, if I try to add a new screen, you can see that you now have new options where it comes preloaded with the new layout containers, and these help making an app responsive much easier. I'm not going to get too deep into this particular concept here, but I would strongly encourage you to check what these new controls, layout controls, allow you to do. So next is the Teams connector. So if you are creating an app outside of Dataverse for Teams or even within Dataverse for Teams, you do have this Teams connector available to you that you can use to perform actions like creating a team, creating a channel, creating a meeting, and then you can also get the list of all teams that are available, which you can then use to, post messages or create adaptive cards or simply add a notification to a channel. So if I go back to my teams here, the way you would add that is you would click on data source and then you would search for teams. You would do that here and you can see there is this option to add the Microsoft Teams connector, which you can then use to perform all these actions and interact with Teams from within your app. If you do check out those sample apps that we talked about initially in the session, a couple of apps, I think inspection and issue reporting, use a lot of features of this particular connector for creating channel notifications when, let's say, an inspection is completed. So do check those sample apps out if you want to see how you can use the Teams connector from within your apps. So I'm going to go back here and move on to the next concept. This one is pretty important. So the biggest problem that I have had with Teams is if I'm using an app and let's say I want to switch the tabs for whatever reason. Let's say I'm performing an inspection and I want to switch to another tab, maybe the wiki tab, because I want to check certain information. The problem with that is when you then come back to your app, you lose the session that you were in. So let's say I have an inspection that has 20 steps and I've answered maybe 15 of them. When I now come back to my app, I will lose my session and all the responses that I've already given to the questions, and I will have to start all over again. So if I hit this play button, it's a small video of the inspection app. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to hit perform an inspection. I'm going to select a vehicle or an area for inspection. And this one is pretty simple. It only has 2 steps. But let's say I've answered the first question and I'm creating a note here. And then if I switch tabs and I come back into the app, you will see that I've lost that information. And it basically tells me to start performing that inspection again. And if this inspection would have had a large number of steps, that can be very painful. So to prevent that, there is an option that is available. But before I get too deep into it, let's see this video now, which has that feature that I'm talking about right now. So if I hit the play button, this is again the same inspection app, but I've added a little bit of functionality that allows you to retain a session. So same thing, I'm going to start an inspection. I am going to add my responses to the first question. I'm going to select OK. I'm going to add a note and I'm going to hit save note. And then I'm going to go out of the app and go to any other tab and then come back to the app. And you will now see that I see 2 options. One is to perform a new inspection. The other is to continue my last inspection. And when I do that, my response to the first step is still available and the note that I added is still available as well. So how do you go about adding this feature to your apps? You might have used offline capabilities in your apps, and that has been available on mobile. So if you are accessing your apps through a browser, offline capabilities are not available. Yes, they are available on the Windows Power Apps app, but I have not seen a lot of support to the desktop app because there might be a new one that's coming in the future. So I don't personally use the Windows Teams app. So the only way I have been able to utilize offline capabilities is by using my apps on a mobile device. But now with Dataverse for Teams, you have offline capabilities if you are accessing any app from within Teams, not just on mobile devices, but even on the desktop Teams app. You still don't have that capabilities if you are accessing your app from within Teams through a browser, but you do have access to the offline capabilities if you're accessing the apps from within the Teams desktop app. One big difference between offline capabilities when it comes to Teams is the storage, or the storage that is available for adding your saved data is 1 MB. So for example, in this inspection app, we have the ability to add pictures to the different steps within a checklist. Most photos these days are greater than 1 MB in size. So what you would want to do is you want to be cautious about the data that you're trying to save and maybe make it conditional, so only data that doesn't take up a lot of space is saved when an app is being accessed through desktop. So how would you make that conditionally possible, that you are going to save images only if the app is being accessed through mobile, and you would not save those images if the app is being accessed using the Teams desktop app? So the way you would do that is by using one of the parameters that we saw earlier. It's called the host client type. If you use that parameter, you can get the client type that a user is using to access the app. If a user is using mobile, the two options that are possible, or the two possible outputs for this parameter, are iOS and Android. If they are accessing the Teams from within a browser, the value of this parameter would be web. If they are accessing the Teams app, if you are accessing the app using the desktop Teams app, the value of this parameter, if I remember correctly, would be desktop. So then what you can do within your code is say if host client type is equal to iOS or Android, only then save images. And the way you would save data is by using save data function, and then you can use the load data function to bring back the data that you might have saved on your local device. So I'm going to go back here, and I am going to go to my blog. So I want to show you a code snippet that you can use to make this possible. So the same videos that I showed you just now, but this is what I was talking about. In the app on start, you can fetch the host client type which is being used by the user. And here I'm saying if the host client type is either web or desktop, set this variable to false. And if the host client type would be iOS or Android, this variable would be set to true. Then what you can do is, let's say when a user is adding an image and hitting the save button, on the save button you can have a code snippet like this which says if global is host client mobile is true, only then save the collection of images to a local file called call images. This way you would enhance the offline capabilities. And when I say offline capabilities, it could be slightly misleading because we are not really providing offline capabilities by adding this functionality, or that's not the original intent at least. The intent is to make the session persistent, which is when you switch the tabs in your team, you should not lose your current session, so you don't have to come back and start all over again, which can be a pain point not just in this inspection app, but let's say you have a form in your app which has 50 different data cards, and if you have answered a lot of them, and if you switch tabs and come back, you would lose all that data, which can become very painful and provide for a bad user experience. So for that, you can basically make it conditional that I will save the images only if I'm on mobile, and then the rest of the things I can save irrespective of the client type or the device or the way that this app is being accessed. So there are a few other best practices that I do want to talk about. Is when you are using the load data function, make sure you specify the third optional parameter, and you specify that the value of that optional parameter to true, because what that does is when you're trying to load the data back into your app, if that local file doesn't exist, which will be the use case when a user is accessing the app for the first time, this variable will specify that if the file doesn't exist, don't throw an error and don't confuse the user, because otherwise it will say that this particular file doesn't exist. Another function that is related to this functionality is clear data. It isn't specified in the Power Apps formula reference, but it is available when you go inside the studio. What this is supposed to do is it's supposed to clear data from the local file that you might have created by using save data function. Based on my testing, I didn't find the clear data function working the way it should. So to get past that, I have a very simple workaround, which is I clear the collection and then I save this collection to that same local file. So I saved my images in call images local file using the save data function. And if I want to clear that, I will clear the collection first and then save this collection back to the same call images local file. Another one which is huge is you will sometimes see an error that says there was a problem saving your data. Name could be too long. This error message is one of the most misleading error messages within Power Apps, because when I first saw this error message, I thought that the name of my collection or the name of my local files is too long. So I actually started renaming all my collections and all my local files within the save data function to shorter names, which wasn't ideal because there were instances where having a longer name was better because it would clarify what that collection and the local file were for. But then I found out that I was still getting that error message, and that's what led me to figure out what the actual problem was. The problem was that if you reach the storage limit of the amount of data that you can save using the save data function in local files on your mobile device, that's when it says that the name could be too long, which simply means that the amount of data that you're trying to save in a collection and then eventually in a local file on your mobile device is more than the storage space that's available. So with that, I would again like to highlight that Dataverse for Teams brings a lot of capabilities that you can use to enhance apps that you create, not just within Dataverse for Teams, but even apps that you have created on, let's say, full Dataverse or SharePoint, but you simply want to add those apps to Teams. With that, I would like to thank you for attending my session today on creating Power Apps within Dataverse for Teams. The video of this session would be uploaded to YouTube after 14 days. So if you have missed the session today, do check out the video when it gets uploaded. Thank you again for attending my session. I hope you enjoyed it and hope you will enjoy all the remaining sessions that are going to happen in the Scottish Summit 2021. Thank you.